Welcome to the Hyperpolyglot Activist, Learn Languages, Make a Difference. My name is Dr. Carlos Yebra Lopez, and today we're going to discuss Wittgenstein's notion of grammatical fictions and how does that enlighten our understanding apropos a classical question in the polyglot community. How many languages do you speak? Let's break it down. By definition, a polyglot is someone who speaks several languages, and this makes it all the more probable to be exposed a ridiculous amount of times to an all too familiar question for us. So, how many languages do you speak? For some polyglots, this might be the perfect opportunity to brag about our accomplishments, while others amongst us might experience some degree of displeasure at the prospect of volunteering an information that could make us come across as pompous or dishonest. But truth be told, eventually most of us do address this question, mainly by mentioning specific numbers, for instance 5 or more than 6 or less than 10, or else some rough estimate, as in just a few, a lot, or even too many if you're feeling particularly lucky that day. At the end of the day, though, all of these reactions validate the question at hand. That is, they implicitly endorse the supposed truth or value in asking a polyglot, how many languages do you speak? In this presentation, I would like to dispute that assumption. I propose that instead of answering the question, how many languages do you speak, in its own terms, we take a step back to reflect on its implicit assumptions. In other words, rather than looking at it as a legitimate language question, I suggest a more interesting perspective is to think about this as a symptom of how our linguistic prejudices, meaning subconscious linguistic ideologies, are entangled with various socioeconomic and political anxieties. To this effect, we're going to recruit the British-Austrian philosopher of language, Ludwig Wittgenstein. Yes, it is the same guy who claimed the limits of my language are the limits of my world, a quote that has been too often widely misunderstood. Check out my take on this quote in the link on top of the screen. So here's the deal. Wittgenstein wrote 2 main volumes, the Tractatus Logico-Philosophicus and the Philosophical Investigations, which was actually compiled posthumously. While in his Tractatus, Wittgenstein pointed out that the reason why people fail to give meaning to linguistic propositions is that they use words that do not denote anything. In his Philosophical Investigations, he discussed the reasons why this happens. In particular, he came up with the notions of language game and grammatical fiction. Language games are not literally games, but more like ways of using language upon which the meaning of words and sentences depends. For instance, if I utter, Wittgenstein says, the word water, is this a request or an answer to a question or an exclamation? Well, it depends on the specific context in which this word is uttered. Or if I utter the sentence, Moses did not exist, which Wittgenstein tackles in proposition number 79. Well, this can mean various things. It can mean that there is no person or historical figure that corresponds to the set of descriptions attributed to the person that goes by the name of Moses. But it can also presumably mean that the leader of the Israelites was not called Moses, or that there cannot have been anybody who accomplished all that the Bible relates of Moses, etc. Wittgenstein noted that using language is like playing a game. What characterizes a game is its rules, the rules of the game. In Wittgenstein's philosophy, the study of rules is called logic, and the study of the rules of sense and nonsense in language is called grammar. Grammatical fictions are thus mystifications that take place whenever we use words or sentences in language games that are not home to these very words or sentences, thus effectively mixing up one way of talking with another, and thereby often creating a pernicious illusion of meaning. An example of grammatical fiction will be the following one. Suppose I go down the stairs and I stumble upon the last step. Oops. When asked why did I stumble, I will be probably inclined to say something along the lines of, well, I thought there was another step there. My saying so, however, makes it look as though prior to falling, I somehow had the introspective moment in which I had the thought, there is another step there. As it happens, nevertheless, I probably did not have such conscious moment during which that thought crossed my mind. The problem, though, is that the grammatical appearance of the sentence I just uttered makes it look as though that was indeed the case. The same happens with questions such as, what is the color of jealousy? Here, I'm applying the word color to a language game, i.e. that of emotions, jealousy being one such case, with which it is not compatible. Or consider the query, what is the purpose of the mountain? Where the word purpose is applied to the language game of natural phenomena, such as mountains, that are alien to the intentionality implied in the notion of purpose. Mountains do not have any purpose. Well, my point here is that the question, how many languages do you speak, is just another instance of these dynamics, where the quantifier, how many, is applied to the realm of languages, thus creating all sorts of confusion. First, because as I discussed in another video, a link to which is now appearing on top of the screen, languages are not autonomous, self-contained, discrete entities that can be quantified as if they were physical objects, such as boxes or apples. This grammatical fiction is predicated upon a number of ideologies. First, monolingual ideologies, which are the beliefs about language that emerged with the European nation state, where language and national boundaries were represented as discrete and mutually reinforcing. For example, in Italy, people speak Italian, in England, people speak English, etc. These monolingual ideologies were subsequently exported beyond Europe, mostly through colonialism and in educational settings. In reality, however, languages are not pre-existing and self-contained entities, but socio-cultural constructs whose limits cannot be defined exclusively in linguistic terms, because so-called languages are actually groupings of ideologues of people with shared social, political, and/or ethnic identities. And second, the ideology of neoliberalism. When we ask how many languages do you speak, we're treating language as capital, as an instrument for publicizing ourselves. Therefore, we are transforming the polyglot community in what one can call the polyglot industry, which would include the proliferation, and this is a Marxist term, meaning the overproduction of polyglots and hyperpolyglots as subjects whose identity is largely contingent upon how many of these languages they are fluent in. Hence the labels polyglot and hyperpolyglot, as well as the increasing popularity of the latter, all of which reinforces the perceived importance of the numbers game as a form of objectification and capitalist accumulation. Again, if we think about the question of how many languages do you speak as a symptom rather than a solution, this leads us to questioning how much of a role do economic profit and political benefit play in the socio-cultural urge to learn as quote-unquote many quote-unquote languages as possible. Wittgenstein's notions of language game and grammatical fiction are tremendously helpful as a form of conceptual clarification or Erklärung, in that they allow us to map out different ways of talking and with what ideological effects do they get applied to each other in our everyday use of language. So that's all from me. I hope you found this explanation useful. Remember that grammatical fictions occur whenever we use a term in a language game that is alien to that very term, and that helps us understand the shortcomings or blind spots of the classical question in the polyglot community. How many languages do you speak? As a question that is fundamentally fallacious. in that it treats languages as self-contained, discrete, autonomous entities that can be quantified and are collectionable, which is, of course, not true. If you have any questions, comments, doubts, please write them in the section below. And as always, thanks for watching.